Welcome to Behind the Seams, a transparent look into the world of fashion. Hosted by
Anne Preis, Emily Burns,
and Micaela Albright. Fashion is here to serve our identity and self-expression. We shop and pick out items that reflect who we are, so we can communicate with society our individuality. But how do we maintain that individuality with mass production and mass consumption? Over the past 20 years, consumption has increased by 400%. This means that consumers are buying more and more, scrambling to purchase new items every 2 weeks to satisfy the demands of advertising and marketing set forth by the industry. But ultimately, this leads to disappointment. Not only does this mean you see other people wearing the exact same thing as you, but that product doesn't serve its ultimate purpose, to serve you. You spent your money to buy that garment so you could express your identity. But it ripped, it got stained, it pulled, it snagged, it shrunk after one wash. It betrayed you. In this episode, Consumer Connection, we examine the connections we have with our clothing, as well as connections formed for us by the industry. Fashion's increase in production leads consumers struggling to find their identity. Richard Kramer, senior professional lecturer of fashion design and merchandising, explains the history of costume.
The history of costume is something that's quite unusual, okay? It has been for most of history the idea that the people at the top of the social order are the ones who can afford to have clothing that we think of as being, status clothing. Up until the end of the 18th century, really into the 19th century, and even into the mid-19th century, the thought of a person in a lower level, let's say a girl who's a shopkeeper in Paris in 1880, was only then being able to go out and buy things that looked like what her upper class people were wearing. Well, when that switch went off, the upper classes looked at that and said, oh my God, the shop girl is wearing the same thing I'm wearing. So I need to do something to put myself away from them, get away. And the whole industry of what we know as haute couture started. That's why haute couture exists today. It was a reaction against mass production. And then all of a sudden, as we work through the 20th century, of course, fashions tend to change more rapidly in each increasing year. I mean, in Egypt, look, people wore essentially the same thing for 3,000 years. Today, it's like every season, fall, winter, spring, summer, each one brings new things, supposedly. I have a feeling as though it's really, we're just trying to escape the ugliness that we created the last season, essentially. So this rapid increase in the style changes, I think, is reliant particularly on this idea of haute couture preaching to the masses. They're not selling to the masses. I mean, when Worth was working in Paris in the 1860s, there were approximately 200 to 300,000 women in the world that could afford his work. Today, there are very few houses. There are only about maybe 500 women in the whole world who can dress every day in haute couture. Okay? And those companies today don't make money on the clothing. They make money on accessories and fragrances and all of that peripheral stuff. They don't make it on the clothing. Okay? So I think there's been a a real skewing of what's going on in the fashion industry. I think it's a lie, essentially. And I think this is something which the public needs to start to look at and say, oh, that's a lie. If they say it's white, I bet you it's going to be black in reality. Unfortunately, that's part of our society today, and I think it goes from top to bottom.
As Professor Richard Kramer noted, the elite class becomes upset when goods are available at a mass level. However, this mass level of available goods allows for communication and inspiration for individuals to express their identity.
Oh, my friend is wearing this. I need to wear that because somehow, I don't know, that makes you feel better. I don't know what it is.
When you buy a luxury handbag, when you pay extra for a luxury item, you're not only paying for quality, you're paying for the name, for the association, for the brand. With luxury brands comes eliteness and the ability to identify oneself within a social class. This is all communicated through advertising and marketing, perhaps one of the most powerful tools driving profits in the fashion industry. In our conversation with Dr. Anne Davis, Associate Professor of Economics and the Chair of Economics, Accounting, and Finance at Marist College, she defines and discusses fashion and what it means today for consumers. How would you define fashion?
As I understand, imperfectly, fashion has been important since the medieval period, maybe even earlier, in terms of how people differentiate themselves first by trade, like am I a cleric or am I a work person in a certain guild, but also am I part of the court, the royalty, am I a rich person? And so it seems like it's a very important status differential that's been perhaps as long as we are aware of human settlements, like in Egypt, people are wearing makeup. I mean, it does actually astound me how people have decorated themselves and the meanings attached to that. So I think we still do it, and maybe it's even more important because class distinctions are more important today.
That's a really good definition. And even today, those class distinctions have kind of gone away because of the availability of so many different styles in the market.
And so if I can look rich by buying inexpensive, fashionable clothes, I will certainly do it, because rich is still high status, as opposed to alternate styles, which perhaps if I'm buying my electric car, then I'll get a different kind of status. But right now, and it's not even clear how now the fashions are determined. Is it design? Is it sexy? Is it, is it fitness? Right? It's hard to know, and maybe that depends on which group you're in and which group you're trying to be in.
A lot of the time we look at quality, and it's really interesting you bring up this point about class and accessibility of fashion. Like I said, it's kind of like fast fashion is the burlap sack of today, because it's available to the lower classes, but they're still trying to be like the upper classes, and that imitation is really what fueled fashion throughout history, as we all learned in our costume history class.
But when you say quality, it used to mean fabrics, and now it might just mean image, right? And so it's the logo that's on your t-shirt, not whether it's 100% cotton or hand sewn or embroidered. So I think what our definition of quality has changed also.
That's a good point.
Do you think that's a reflection of people's, like a change in people's values?
I think it's partly the advertising. So if I see the image on the ad and I want to be like the ad, all that really matters is the image. And so sustainability or durability of the clothing is no longer an issue because it's so cheap. And so now it's really how it looks. It's not how it wears and how it lasts. So if I'm making clothes by hand, or if weaving is a very labor-intensive, expensive process, I'm going to want those clothes to last. But now that we have a global supply chain, let me throw that in, things are very cheap. So my latest example of this, I have to tell you, is I have a pair of shoes that I wanted to have a new heel put on. Well, first of all, there are no shoe repair stores anymore around here. But there is one in Grand Central. So I was going to New York, and I took my shoes with me. Okay, but then it's $38. Sorry, it was $28 to put heels on my shoes. I could buy a new pair of shoes for $28, probably 2 or 3. Well, I did it anyway because these are favorite shoes, but it was probably money thrown away. And so when it's really cheaper to buy new, then there's this self-enforcing. If you're not wearing the new, then people kind of wonder what's wrong with you, right? And so you have to look. I mean, you tell me. I think how people look is extremely important in everyday interactions. And so we're all kind of obsessed with it. And if we're not, we're outcasts. Or at least we have to have some kind of other identity, self-representation. If we're not actually looking as we should look by whatever standards and however they're set.
As Dr. Ann Davis discusses, fashion is a means of expression. Fashion is what we use to show the world who we are. But how do we decide which brands and which company best illustrate our own identity? How do we choose? Why do we choose? Which do we choose? What ultimately leads us to make the decision to purchase something? Advertising, marketing, or is it deception? Peter Brickman, Senior Professional Lecturer of Fashion Merchandising, addresses the question, does deception fuel the fashion industry? Now, earlier you were talking about if you really thought about it, you'd be a vegan because it would be hard to eat this hamburger.
Yes.
In a way, there's kind of a curtain between the actual food industry and what is presented to us.
Yes.
Do you think that deception has fueled the fashion industry
Oh,
in
yeah.
the same way?
Oh, sure. Oh, sure. There was, you may have heard of Sims. Did you guys hear of Sims clothing in New York? Cy Sims did the ad. Marcy Sims, his daughter, did it afterwards. They were a discount, started discount men's suits and things like that. And he had a tagline called, that said, an educated consumer is our best customer. But that's not true. We play games with our customers in the apparel business. Everything is a big secret. And I tell my students that from experience. I know when we're getting ripped off. You all will know after you go through the fashion program. You know, I can't walk into a retail store without seeing costs of everything that I see. Doesn't matter what kind of garment it is. I have a pretty good idea of what it costs to make it and how much more I'm paying than I should be paying. And it's scary. It really is scary. We don't always tell the truth about things. We pass things off as cashmere, for instance. We can say it's all cashmere up to, it's like, I think 20 or 25% of other materials that are mixed in with the cashmere. So there are all kinds of things like that. That we produce something called CVC, which is cheap value cotton, which has other things besides the cotton mixed in, that we do not try to educate our customers and tell them. We don't. And I'm not sure, maybe you're right. Maybe the customer doesn't want to know. It's like food. You know, don't confuse me with the details. I really don't want to know about that.
In a way, it's so important to know because if you go into the store and you buy something that's a polyester knit, you know it's going to pill. If you buy a cotton knit, it might pill less. And in a way, it is deception. If you don't, the resources are there though. Really, you can go out and find, you know, how textiles wear. But it's interesting. I think you're right.
It's really bad because a few years ago there was a manufacturer who was making fur trimmed, outerwear. Like the hood had a fox fur trim on it, and it turned out it was dog hair. And it caught because people, we get very upset in this country when people do things with our pets. But we know in other countries they eat dogs, they eat cats, they eat other things that we would consider to be a pet. And so there was a case, I think that goes on all the time. Or they tell us that it's faux fur, it's made out of artificial, and it's really real animal fur. I mean, it's really hard to tell that. Really, really. You need a microscope and you need to know what you're doing. So, yeah. You know, the fashion industry is good at fooling people.
Fooled or not, the consumer is more concerned with the price rather than if that sweater is really 100% cashmere. The consumer might be fooled, but the fact is, they demand low prices. And how are those prices achieved? The average consumer might not be pleased to hear. So is it deception, or is it a truth that we just don't want to see? In our conversation with Dr. Caroline Ryder, Associate Professor in the School of Management, she discusses consumer expectations. She begins by explaining why our clothing has become so inexpensive.
You know, it was because of globalization. It was because of China. In the beginning of globalization, China produced a lot of really high quality goods for very, very low prices. But because I study things, I knew that that was not going to last. So I bought as many down comforters as I could because they were making really, really good down comforters for $100 a piece. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then I said to all my friends and relations, listen, if you like down comforters, buy them now, because in a period of time, either they'll get much more expensive or the quality will go downhill. And so it's happened. The quality has gone downhill. They've tried to keep the price. You can still buy the $110 down comforter, but now it crunches and crackles because it's full of big, ugly feathers. Some down.
Something has to give always, and that's the problem.
So if people's expectations could be educated a little bit, you know, it is a matter of expectations. I didn't expect to have 30 t-shirts and to, you know, buy them and throw them away. And so, but the expectation of how many clothes you were going to have is something that has changed in the course of the last 45, 50 years. But it could go the other way again. It's a matter of education.
And do you think the expectation has changed because of the industry or because consumers have just gotten used to wanting more?
Well, it's of course probably both, but I do think that one of the problems that we have is that consumers' actual buying power has gone down since the 1970s. So it's much harder to afford a house. It's much harder to afford a car. It's hard to afford the big ticket items. So what we do is we console ourselves with lots of low ticket items. You know, electronics are cheap, clothes are cheap, and we don't really care that we have to replace them every so often, because in order to make ourselves feel better, it's like, oh, we can buy one of these and we can buy one of these. We anesthetize ourselves to our larger condition by having stuff that we can buy. So that's kind of a problem. That's an emotional problem in the society.
Buying a quantity of cheap goods is not satisfying us. How do we move into buying more quality pieces? Jennifer Finn, affiliate professional lecturer of fashion merchandising, addresses this price change.
Only in the past 10 years have we seen like a dramatic drop in retail prices where it seems just like anybody can afford the fashion and trends of today. But, you know, if sustainability becomes more of a priority in the fashion industry and businesses say simply, this t-shirt costs $40, there's nothing else to it, won't consumers have to kind of just conform or simply have kind of a revolution of values and say, maybe it's not worth it?
Probably a little of both, again, on there. As we force, say, maybe consumer regulations that you have to reuse the water and use better dyes and things of that nature, where that those processes have to be done, that will eventually continue to raise the prices of the garment, so everybody will. But as soon as somebody else can come up with a textile or a fabrication development that's being made that can lower the price, you're going to bring it right back down again. But I think the more that we introduce at such a young age that it's just to do good, to feel good, to be good, that there will be those people that will just support those brands that do sustainable measures.
But ultimately, why do we feel as if we always have to consume? Here is Sonia Roy, Senior Professional Lecturer of Fashion Design and Merchandising.
I think we buy more because we've been told for a long time that we need more in order to be, you know,
A whole person.
Whatever it is we think we need to be, you know. So yeah, I think it's all one big tornado of of experiences that have led us to where we are. And it's no mistake, right? The guy who's telling you that you need this in order to be a better person is getting paid by the guy who's producing that. And that guy wants to sell you more. So he's going to tell you that you need more of that. It's all tied in together.
Can you talk about the growth of the fashion industry and the fashion cycle? I know you teach a trend forecasting class. We used to have 2 seasons in a year. Now we have 52.
That's that problem. They've learned that the more they put out there, the more we buy. So they've trained us, and we train our children to want more and more and more.
Marketing is defined as converting wants into needs. For young consumers, this is especially effective, as they always feel the need to fit in, and buying a certain product may help them achieve this. Here's Professor Richard Kramer.
It's all about making yourself either look better or making yourself more acceptable to other people, in quotes.
And that's one thing about youth,
Yeah.
You're constantly trying to fit in, because that's one of the great problems of youth, is that you constantly are feeling, oh, am I doing the right thing? And that can have a very powerful social as well as psychological problem with a consumer.
In some ways, you have to look at the industry and the advertising as at fault, but you also have to look at consumer awareness.
I mean, I think one of the greatest problems when I look at H&M or Old Forever 21, what are they producing? Yes, they're producing a temporary fix. It's kind of like a needle in the arm. It's a temporary fix. But then, essentially, you can't wash it. And what are they producing? They're producing landfill. Talk about being non-sustainable.
The United States generates, on average, 25 billion pounds of textile waste per year. This means that the average American throws away 68 pounds of textile waste per year into a landfill. Jackie Chiquoine, Associate Editor of Retail Intelligence at WGSN, speaks to this issue.
But a lot of people just don't realize, they don't know how much waste is created by the industry. How much of what's sitting in a landfill is your old clothes. And I think the more they know about that, coupled with the way that the economy is going and the way that spending is kind of not really bouncing back, even though jobs and incomes are, I think it's kind of this powerful change.
How do we create this powerful change? Here's Professor Richard Kramer. I think the interesting thing, too, a lot of Marist students that I've talked to who say they're interested in sustainability, they know it's a huge growing thing. Well, I don't have the lifestyle yet to support the companies that I want to support. So, I'm going to shop at these fast fashion companies. What do you do about that?
This is always a question that arises in class. You've got to change your mentality that you need that to feel good. I think we need to almost go back to the 60s, and become flower children, because at that point it was not important. It was like freedom and love and all of that. Now that sounds stupid to us today, but there was a real significance in that. It relieved the person of the responsibility to be conformist. So you were what you were, And I think that's important. I think that's something that your generation may not get to, but I think the next generation will. I think they will be so fed up with all of this that they'll just go, hey, I've had it with you. Get away. Let's hope it's true.
We need a revolution of values, a change of mindset to achieve a sustainable fashion future. When consumers realize the power of their dollar, they realize the great power that they hold. Here is Professor Sonia Roy and Professor Jennifer Finn.
A lot of consumers, when they're making the choice to buy cheap goods, it is because they don't have a lot of money.
I think that's really key, is your budget can be very limiting. I talk to a lot of like students in the fashion industry that the fashion department that are interested in sustainability, like, and me too, myself. Like, I love to support sustainable brands, but they are more expensive.
Right.
So you have to like think about where you want to spend your money, invest it in something specific.
And I think that it's also kind of, it's not looked at it like this right now, but it's like the more that you invest in your stuff, it's making you richer. It's not making you poorer. The more you're spending your money on things of low quality, they're going to break. You spent money on it, now it's in the garbage. Your money is in the garbage.
Right.
And the more that you kind of hold off and invest your money in things of quality, you're actually becoming richer, which is what a lot of fast fashion brands are kind of lying to us and telling us that it's the opposite.
The challenge with that only is in that when it's something that's very trendy. No one wants to spend a lot of money on an item that you know will be out of style. It's a fad. We've learned this for centuries now of that cycle, that if it's not a staple or a classic and it's a fad and it's going to be out of style, then I don't want to spend a lot of money on it. So I think that was the original rise of fast fashion, was to bring all of that great trendy stuff and to know that you don't have to spend a lot of money on it. And I think that's where it begins. If you find those first quality pieces and then have that balance of continually making sure that you just have a good couple quality pieces in your wardrobe and then, infuse.
Dr. Richard Feldman, Associate Professor of Environmental Science, believes that consumers wish to be sustainable.
You'll have a segment of the society that wants to be responsible, and they will be receptive to that. It's just like I ask my students after we've talked about protecting biological diversity, would you be willing to pay a little bit more for products that don't harm species, that help to conserve species? Invariably, they say yes, with an important caveat: when I'm financially able. So, there's this balancing act. Some will say they're financially able earlier than others, but it's always juxtaposed against economic ability.
It's not just about protecting biological diversity. It's about protecting our bodies, our skin, just as we do in what we consume in the food industry. Here is Professor Roy, followed by Dr. Feldman.
The food movement, we become so conscious of what we're putting in our bodies, but what about the biggest organ on our bodies, our skin? Like, what are we doing about that? And there's so many studies that show, like eating these bad foods, being exposed to these chemicals has caused these health issues. And the fashion industry is kind of just sitting there with, all these chemicals on our skin, and people aren't aware of it.
Yeah. No, they're not. A lot of it on our children. When I did children's sleepwear, all the flame retardant chemicals, I'm like, what the heck was in those? Because you can feel it, from working with the fabric. At the end of the day, I had a film on my hands that I would have to wash off. So that's your kid.
I don't think the general public is aware that there might be something on their clothes that's meant to protect it that way, and it could be not good for one's health.
Ibex Outdoor Clothing believes that consumers have the power to change. Here is Misti Martin, followed by Anne Davis, both on the product development team at Ibex.
Well, it's becoming increasingly all-important to our consumers that they are conserving natural resources. As such, they do their due diligence about the companies that they buy from, and they strive to protect and conserve in all areas that they can. There are a lot of choices out there, and the consumer is making educated choices of where they buy their clothes. It's gotten so it's quality over quantity now.
I think apparel is so interesting. There's just this, there's a human impulse to clothe ourselves in ways that are interesting or conforming, many ways to consider that. And that impulse will never go away. Consumers vote with their dollars. We vote as consumers, we place that vote for what's meaningful to us every time we spend money on apparel.
Jackie Chiquoine of WGSN agrees. Consumers have power, and they vote with their dollars.
I think it's going to come more from customer demand. like I said, people aren't buying quite as much as they used to, and it has a lot to do with the economy. Like the environmental and economic issues are really dovetailing right now in a way that makes people think about what they're spending their money on, and how you spend your money can be almost as important as how you vote, like what you're spending your money on. I think more than anything, people are responding right now to even more than sustainability or what used to be sort of an obsession with like eco-friendliness or like recycling or organic materials. Things are really now, people are super focused on transparency, and it means a lot to a lot of customers to see a company disclose how things are manufactured, the conditions of their labor, or, where their factory is. A lot of people really like, buying made in USA clothes here. I think it's really just a matter of people thinking more about what they're buying, and it seems like it's happening. It's going to happen slowly, but change is going to happen eventually. The more and more people know that, the more they respond to these smaller companies that have a more closed manufacturing system, are made in America. People aren't shopping the way that they used to.
Dr. Thomas Lynch, Associate Professor of Environmental Science, is concerned with the negative environmental impacts the fashion industry has caused by overproduction and overconsumption. Sustainable fashion doesn't have to be an oxymoron if consumers, as well as industry, become aware of their impact and strive to make a change.
Okay, now you're informed, you know what the situation is. Okay, you're a consumer, you have choices. What are you going to choose?
I think what's so important about developing a connection with our clothing is, this emotional connection that we have with our clothes. So when I wear something that I like, that, hasn't betrayed me, that it fits me, I feel good. I walk more confidently that day. Clothing really, it's not just utilitarian. There's something beyond that serves us emotionally.
And yeah, I think that we get confused a lot, like as consumers when we're shopping. We see something we like, we try it on, and it looks terrible. All of a sudden, like, it looked amazing on the hanger, and then you put it on and it looks terrible on you. And then you think, well, now, I have to lose weight, or my body should be a different way. And I think, like, as consumers, like, we default to the fact that there's something wrong with us, not there's something wrong with the garment. And I think we need to strive to create things that serve a purpose for us and not assuming that we have to fit ourselves to the garment.
I think that's often the problem that we find with these trends, is that you want to follow the latest trend. You're all caught up in being caught up in the trend, but then you go and you try things on and they don't flatter everybody. Like, for example, those co-ords, those coordinated outfits that people used to wear, like the crop top and the shorts. I would go try those on in any dressing room. Like, I used to think it was the mirror that would look bad within dressing rooms, and I would go try them on everywhere, and they just don't go with my body. And I've come to accept that because I'm strong in that sense. But I think people are so caught up in being with the trend that they want to adapt themselves to fashion, when really fashion should be adapting to us.
Exactly. You need to have a strong sense of your own identity, because, we don't wear fashion so that we can look like someone else. We wear it so we can tell people who we are and express ourselves. And, like you're saying, the trends that are dictated by the industry and retailers are not for everyone. And you need to be confident to say, you know what? That really low, neck shirt is just not going to look good on me. Those skinny white jeans, not going to be able to pull that off. So you need to be able to have the confidence, the individuality to say, this is my trend, this is my individuality, and I feel good in this outfit, not what they're telling me to wear.
It's up to us to dictate what fashion is. It's not up to the fashion industry to dictate how we should be viewing it.
Exactly, and that's like how we define it in episode 1. The definition of sustainable fashion is the fostering of self-expression through the conscious consumption. And conscious consumption isn't just buying, ethical clothing. It's being conscious of what looks good on you, buying clothes that flatter your body and align with your individuality.
before listening to the next episode of Behind the Seams.
Rate the items in your closet on a scale from 1 to 10. 10 being the clothes you feel amazing in, and 1 being the clothes you never want to wear again. Instead of bagging them up and donating them to the thrift store, as shockingly, only 10 to 20% of the clothing in thrift stores is actually sold at thrift stores. They are constantly bombarded by an excess of clothing and are forced to either export or dispose of it. Find an alternative method for your unwanted clothes. Anything that doesn't score high might do better in someone else's closet. Try selling your low-scoring items on Poshmark, Tradesy, or ThredUp to find them a happy new closet, where you can not only make a little money, but guarantee your clothes are going someplace good.
If you're interested in learning more, follow us on Instagram at Behind the Seams Podcast or visit our website at thefold.marist.edu/behindtheseams. For further questions, email us at behindtheseamspodcast@gmail.com.
This episode of Behind the Seams was produced by Anne Preis, Micaela Albright, and myself, Emily Burns. For this episode, we would like to thank our showcase contributors in order of appearance: Richard Kramer, Dr. Ann Davis, Peter Brickman, Dr. Caroline Ryder, Jennifer Finn, Sonia Roy, Jackie Chiquoine, Dr. Richard Feldman, Misti Martin, Ann Davis, and Dr. Thomas Lynch. A special thank you to Wayne Preis for the original song, Melissa Halvorson for capstone advising, the Marist College Fashion Department, and capstone advising committee.